Welcome to KennyRoy.com. I'm Kenny Roy. This is the Ask Video Mail for the week of December 27th, 2010, the last video mail of 2010. Yay! Woo, exciting! I don't know where I'm going with that. Thank you for everyone being on the site and for submitting your questions to the Ask Video Mail. Don't forget to submit your questions because you may just get a custom demo for you. So I'm very excited about how many questions have been submitted to the site, and I can always use more. It's kind of a task of having to sift through the ones that I get and come up, decide which ones are going to be the most beneficial to the most amount of students. And I'm really excited about how many really quality questions have been submitted. But don't forget to submit yours to webmaster@kennyroy.com. So it's the end of the year, and I'm actually super stoked about this Ask Video Mail because it is a great question, and I think it pertains to a lot of people, and it's a very, very valuable video mail. So without further ado, let's look at the question. Now, the graph editor is a very mysterious thing. You have all of these curves going every which direction, and you have all of this information that is supposed to be useful to you. You're supposed to be able to decipher it, but what is really going on in there? I'll tell you the first thing. Number one, with more experience, the graph editor will become more and more decipherable to you. For the most part, it'll also become more and more a part of your workflow. I don't know very many animators that do very well in terms of being able to edit their animation, in terms of being able to hit notes in a timely manner, who don't use the graph editor at least 50-50 with the panels. Okay, so with experience, number one, that will just come to you, and it'll probably just work its way into your workflow. So if you're a beginning animator, don't worry about the graph editor looking scary right now. As you get more experience, it will turn into something new for you. Number two, the graph editor is kind of it's a tool that I feel has a lot of potential for tweaking and adjustments that you may not know and you may not realize, and especially Maya's graph editor has some tools that I find are very underused by students and animators who are learning. So if you've just thrown yourself into the deep end, maybe you're using a student license of Maya, maybe you are just seeing Maya for the first time, but if you threw yourself into the deep end, you're probably taking what is kind of equatable to a stop motion animator's approach to 3D, which is you're posing in panel, you're posing to camera, and your animation is really not looking very much like what you want it to until you get down to 3s and 2s and 1s. Your keyframes on 2s or 1s. So that is something that we can fix. And so I just want to show you a few tools and a few tips about the graph editor and how to use it that maybe you don't realize, or maybe you do and you can just use a refresher. But I'm really happy about this question because it applies to all of us. We all have to use the graph editor. Okay, so you may recognize this scene. This is the sad walk cycle that we used for last week's video mail. I'm going to constrain it to just the frames that are in this cycle. And so here's the thing. When you have a cycle, it's a great example. If you remember from the video mail that I talked about cycles, I said like you want to have all your detail kind of like evenly dispersed throughout the cycle. So don't have like very vanilla, static, standard beginning and end of the cycle, and then the middle has all of that stuff, the neat stuff like overlap and whatever. One thing is the issue of overlap with a cycle, where the graph editor comes very, very, very much in handy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete the animation that's on the head right now. And so as you'll see, the head is not overlapping anymore. Okay? Now we have a 48 frame cycle. rather than think to yourself, okay, how am I going to make it so that the head, which is overlapping, and I don't know at what point in the animation that overlap is actually happening on frame 1. Why don't we just create 48 frames of overlap and then use the graph editor to place it where it needs to be? So I'm going to go to frame 1. I'm going to have the head down like it's going to be on a down pose, and Bloke actually has his neck control is FK or is IK, so you kind of have to do a little bit of adjusting like that. It's going to be the same on frame 24 and frame 48, okay, and then on frame 12 it's going to be up. Just fix the neck a little bit, and so I'm going to copy this to frame 36. Okay, so now in the graph editor we have our cycle animation. Okay, here it is. Oops. There it is. Rotate Z. So we have our animation. Let's just make sure that pre and post infinity is cycle so that it does work with our animation. And now I'm just going to hit play, and as you see, it looks like he's walking kind of like a chicken. He's ducking into his steps. So that's no good, right? So very simple. Graph editor, grab the entire curve. Since I've made sure that the post and pre-infinity curve types are cycle, and we're going to get the animation repeating, I can just slide it around and see what works. All right, so it looks like his head is going down way too early. So let's delay this 5 frames and hit play. Still a little bit early. Let's go back. Let's do 3 frames further. There we go. All right, so I didn't have to. Now let's take a look at this. All right, frame 1 is right here, and look on the graph where that animation curve is. You'd never be able to really, like, first try definitely into it that, oh my gosh, it's like right 3/4 the way through that cycle, and set a keyframe right there, and then go forward 11 frames, which is what this is, and then set the next correct key, right? So the graph editor is a great way to get the motion that you know that needs to be in there, and then move it around and play around with it. Okay, I find so many students don't really have that adventurous, experimenting spirit. You can do so much with this program, and it's non-destructive. Even just the fact that you have save as. There should be so much more experimenting going on the part of learning, of animators who are learning. Okay, so here we go. I just timed this correctly. You can actually even go 1 frame later. Boop. Okay. Yeah. See, I like that. See, now the head is actually overlapping with the body. Now, I don't think that that's enough. Back to the graph editor. I'm going to make it have more overlap. Okay? I'm just going to scale it from the middle and double the size of the overlap on the head. Okay? That's a little bit too much. Okay? But I also don't like where the middle point is. It looks like the middle point is like right here, so his head is primarily back. So, bam, back to the graph editor, I'm going to move the curve so that the same amount of overlap is happening, but it's happening in general on a lower pose, like down here. Okay? So let's watch. All right, now I need to go, see, this is the down pose. My translate keys need to be fixed now. And let's really fix this. Okay. And now I can copy this to the other pose where it needs to go. Oops, that's probably not it. Where was that? Oh, that was the upwards. Okay. So right here instead. Oops, and right here at the end. So I need to go a little bit outside of my range where it was set, but that doesn't matter because we have the correct curve types here. And let's just make sure everything is cycling correctly. Okay, here we go. Back to 1 to 48. This brings me to my next point. I wasn't planning on making this point, but the graph editor is a great place to triage problems. As you can see, there was a big pop in my animation. What is happening? Well, it looks like right here we can diagnose the problem immediately by seeing that the correct key was not copied where it needed to go. So I'm just going to go into that key and find out what happened. Oh, it looks like I accidentally copied all channels instead of the selected channels when I was doing the adjustment to the translate Y on my character's head. So just going to instead eyeball it instead. And make sure my rotate is still where it needs to be. Okay, here we go. There we go. So now we're back in good shape. When you are looking for problems in the graph editor, you can look for things like really sharp tangents. Sometimes if you have weighted tangents, you'll stretch one way out and then you'll set a key really close to it and you won't realize that that long tangent, I'll show you an example right now, that long tangent is actually screwing up the tangency of the next key. So I'm going to go to weighted here, and I'm going to free the weight. Oops. And so like sometimes, like right here, you'll take that tangent weight way out. Okay? So it looks like it's locked, like you can't even have a key, the tangency any closer. But if you move this key, oh look at that, they're all weighted. Oh, that's a new feature. Oh, that's actually really cool. Well, you learn something new every day, don't you? Typically, when you had a key that had a weighted tangent that was drawn way out like that, it actually went as far as you possibly could set it. And then if you put a new value on, like rotate, like right here, okay, it would pinch even worse than that. You could actually almost get a completely stepped keyframe by doing that in the old Maya. But it looks like they've worked that out, which is really nice. So looking for things like pinch tangents, looking for things like different curve types, like linear going into a spline and stuff like that. Maybe you missed that when you were changing your animation from blocking to blocking plus or something like that. And a lot of different things really stick out for you when you're looking in the graph editor. We just went through how to make adjustments. So again, let's say that I want the hips to overlap more. Well, I'm just going to grab this and I'm just going to scale it up, and now, wow, look at that. He's totally wobbly and floppy. But that might be the animation that I'm going for. So it's really nice. The graph editor is really great for making the kinds of really thought through, like very planned and intuitive changes to the animation that you need. Okay. The other thing I really want to show you is the buffer, how to use buffer curves. Okay, buffer curves are an extremely powerful tool because what it basically is an infinite undo on your animation curves. Okay, I go through this in my workflow lecture, which should be in the available in the shop for you to download if you like. But I'm going to talk a little bit about it right now. Okay, let's say I want to make a change to the overlap on the base right here. Okay, I'm going to grab this and I'm going to move it up here. All right, so now there's this weird plateau going on in the middle of my walk cycle. You know, doesn't look very good at all. I don't know what it's there for. Whatever. So then I select this and I grab this and I grab this and I move this and I grab this and I rotate that and I undo that and grab this and rotate that and undo that and grab this, and then I hit undo, 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 and then finally one more undo and I'm back to where the animation that I had on my root in the beginning. Now that's a pain in the butt because the undo buffer only goes so far, and you can actually cut off the undo tree by doing certain things to the scene, and it clears the or it actually cuts off the branch that undo tree that you're on, and you can't save the undo buffer into the scene as well. So if you save your scene and close it, then you're snookered because you can't get that that animation back. So there's a barrier in between you and the most experimental you can be. And I constantly am pushing my students at Animation Mentor to experiment all the time. This is the time when you should be experimenting. So what can you do to actually change that? Well, enter buffer curves, and this is what they do. They are, for all intents and purposes, an infinite undo queue for your animation curves. Okay? And they're an infinite undo for as many animation curves as you possibly want. Okay? Not only that, they are saved into the scene. So basically, you have no excuse now, after I show you what buffer curves are, to not be experimenting with your animation. Now, I do talk about this a lot in my workflow lecture, which is in the shop right now, and you can go over to the shop and download that. But let me just talk about buffer curves for a second, because it's a very important part of the graph editor that you should be using. So here is my animation, okay? These two buttons are your best friend from now on. This one is buffer curve snapshot, and this one is swap buffer curve. You hit buffer curve snapshot and it makes a snapshot. But let's go up here first and go to view, show buffer curves, okay? Now what has been done is there's been a snapshot of a buffer curves, and it doesn't look like anything has been done. Well, that's until you move your animation curve. And you'll notice that underneath, or when I select the curve itself, there is the old curve. Well, that's interesting, because if I leave that behind and I do little changes over here, okay, let's say that I want this to be even more bent over. I'm going to grab this. I'm actually making changes here, and I'm not undoing them. I want this to be more bent over, and I want this to be more bent over, even more. But now, this change that I did, this is no good. Do I have to hit undo? No. All I do is hit the second button, which swaps buffer curve. What it does is it basically puts your animation back to where that original snapshot was created, and leaves behind a new buffer curve where the animation is right now. So if I hit it, boom, it goes back. Now remember, I didn't do any undo. This was always available to me, always available, and I get this for infinity. I can save the scene and close it and open it back up, and I'll have it again. Now let me change the animation even a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to make a new buffer curve by hitting the first button, and now, as you can see, it's behind the curve where I have it. Okay, and then again, I'm going to actually grab all three of these curves and make a new buffer curve for all three of these. Move these crazy out of the way. That's broken animation. Take this guy. Okay. Make an adjustment, go back to these curves, okay, and just snap them back to the buffer curve. As you can see, boom, animation went right back to where it needs to be, and my little experiment did not destroy my scene, and worked perfectly. Now, again, the graph editor has a lot of different tools in it that really help you. Okay, I've seen some discussion in the forums about AutoTangent, which is fantastic. I think that AutoTangent is great, and I think that everyone should be using the tools and experimenting with the tools that are best for you. You can check out all of these different tools, what they do. Most of them are just shortcuts for menu items, but these are the two most overlooked and underused buttons right here, which is the buffer curve. Experiment with it. Try to save a scene and close it, and then open the scene back up again and see, oh my gosh, my buffer curves are still there. What this allows you to do is, imagine this, selecting your entire character. This is the entire animation. Okay, I'm just going to grab the whole thing, make buffer curves for it, and do a completely new take. All right, maybe I want his head to be way up here, and this arm is I'm going to move it, and I'm going to change the timing of this arm, and I'm going to make it way bigger or smaller like this. So, and I can save this animation like this. Okay, this is totally crazy, isn't it? I can save it like that, and then just grab these, go back to the buffer curve, and boom, look, it's right back where I need it to be. So I can experiment totally free with absolutely no cares in the world, and that's what I get with the buffer curves. So just to wrap up, that kind of experimentation is really, really advantageous for people learning animation, and really pros alike. Everyone should be experimenting and doing new things, and there's no reason, you don't have to be afraid that your animation is going to be destroyed if you use buffer curves. There's a separate undo cue for the camera and for the scene and for animation. So you have buffer curves, you have the bracket keys to do undo and redo on your camera, and then you have Z to undo and redo all other things like scene selections, and also, you know, manipulation of controls and stuff like that. So it's all separated, and that's really nice. And then also the graph editor will become a bigger part of your workflow. If I have to say what I think it should be, is pretty much 80% panel and 20% graph editor when you're beginning your animation, and when you're moving into blocking and blocking plus, so in the later life of your scene, it should be about 70% graph editor and maybe 30% panel. And what you're doing in panel is just correcting to camera, because you're doing polishing and you're smoothing curves and you're looking at what's happening in the graph editor primarily when you're polishing, and then you're just correcting in panel and making silhouettes stronger and post stronger and whatever during that process. So I would say, again, 20%, 80% in the beginning, and then it flips, maybe 70-30 at the end of a shot by the time you're done. Okay? And just have fun with it. This is all supposed to be fun. I mean, we make cartoons, people. How bad could it possibly be? So enjoy yourselves. Happy New Year, everybody. Actually, well, it's going to be a couple days, but Happy New Year, and I hope you have a really great time. You're with friends and family, and you're enjoying yourself. And good luck with your animation. As always, rock on.